Coconut, one of Jamaica's most beloved ingredients, is the foundation of classics like Grater Cake and Shammy. For most Jamaicans, Grater Cake bring back memories of that bright pink and white treat, perfectly scented with almond essence and rosewater. It's the kind of sweet you'll grab after school, and no harvest or cultural event feels complete without it. Then there is Shammy, its richer, spicier cousin made with brown sugar, ginger, and warm spices. It's a whole different vibe. This right here is one of my favorite sweets. Hey, I'm Nick, and today we're making two classic Jamaican coconut treats that have been enjoyed for generations. Let's get into it. Shammy, like many other Jamaican foods, has its roots in colonial history. At one point, Jamaica was one of the world's largest sugar producers, making sugar a readily available ingredient. Coconuts too were plentiful on the island. While native varieties existed, the Spanish introduced additional types, increasing the diversity and solidifying coconut as a staple of Jamaican cuisine. It was only natural for these two abundant ingredients, sugar and coconut, to come together, creating a variety of beloved sweet treats. To make our shammy, I'm starting with a dried coconut. I'll crack it open using the back of a heavy knife. Other sturdy tools like a hammer or mallet also work, and maybe even safer. If all else fails, you can break it on concrete or on a sturdy rock. If the coconut water inside looks clean and fresh, you can save it for a drink. Once the shell is cracked, I'll break it into smaller, more manageable pieces and use a spoon to pry the flesh away from the hard shell. If you don't have access to dried coconuts, you can use pre-shredded or desiccated coconut instead. It's much quicker. Next, I'm going to give these a rinse to get rid of any trash or coconut fibers. Once they're nice and clean, it's time to grate. I'm using a box grater for this. I'm not going for the smallest holes here because I want my shammy to have a bit of extra texture. One size up is just right for that. If you prefer, you could use a blender or a food processor instead. Just keep in mind that you will need to account for any extra water that you add, and the texture will end up much finer than what you get with grating. It's the same product in the end, but if you use a machine, I don't really think you can call it Grater Cake in good faith. Alright, let's get cooking. I'm starting with a heavy bottom pan on medium heat. Into that, I'm adding 1 cup of brown sugar. I'll explain why I need more than this in just a moment. Half cup of water. 2.5 tablespoons of freshly grated ginger. Half teaspoon of nutmeg. A pinch of salt to bring out all those flavors. 1 teaspoon of cinnamon. The goal here is to infuse the syrup with the ginger and warm spices while reducing the water content a bit. Grater Cake originally used wet cane sugar, which was early in the sugar processing stage. Wet sugar had a higher molasses content, so if you want something closer to the original flavor, you could add a few drops of molasses to the mix. Or if you have access to it, you can just use wet sugar. Once some of the water has reduced and you can see those large lazy bubbles, it's time to add 2.5 cups of grated coconut. The coconut will release additional water and we'll need to reduce that as well. Start on medium heat, and as the water cooks off, gradually lower the heat to prevent burning. At this point, most of the water has evaporated, but I'm not really seeing any signs that this will set properly. The standard ratio for Grater Cake is 2.5 cups of shredded coconut to 1.5 cups of sugar. I initially tried starting with just 1 cup of sugar to create a less sweet version, but based on how it's looking, it won't set firmly enough. So I'm going to add the remaining half cup of sugar to get it just right. We might also need a little splash of water to help dissolve the sugar, especially if most of the water has already reduced. Cook off that extra water and we should be good to go. Now, a big question people often ask is, how do I know when the shammy is ready? Sometimes you take it off the fire and it doesn't set properly. Here's a great way to tell if it's ready. Check the size of the pot. If you see the sugar starting to set there, that's a solid indicator. If it's setting on the hot pot, you can trust that it will set after we take it off the heat. I'm also adding half a teaspoon each of rosewater and almond extract. These flavorings are more volatile, so adding them at the end helps to preserve their delicate aromas in the shammy. All that's left now is to remove this from the pot. But first, we need to talk about a very important component of making grater cake. In traditional Jamaican cooking, banana leaves are a must for treats like shammy. The slightly waxy texture creates a natural non-stick surface that's perfect for setting the shammy. Not only that, but banana leaves help to cool it quickly and evenly. And above everything else, I just love how this looks. It adds that perfect touch to the presentation and gives it that authentic traditional feel. Before we use the banana leaves though, we need to wilt it by heating it. Traditionally this is done over open flame, but you can use any heat source like hot water or steam to achieve the same effect. This wilting step, also known as quailing in Jamaica, makes the leaves more flexible so they don't crack or separate when you bend them. If you're using banana leaves, make sure to do the quailing step before your shammy is ready to set. No banana leaves? No problem. Grease paper, wax paper, parchment paper, or even just a non-stick surface will work just fine. Now, this is ready for the shammy. You want to do this while the shammy is still hot, and you need to move quickly. The longer it cools, the harder it gets to work with. I'm just grabbing dollops and roughly shaping them into little mounds. Using 2 spoons make this process almost seamless. Growing up, that right there was one of my favorite things to do. Honestly, it's the most delicious part of making shammy. Now, this hard sugar can be a pain to wash out, but here's a quick tip. Add a bit of water to the pot and bring it to a boil. In just a minute or two, the sugar will dissolve completely. There you have it. The shammy is setting up nicely, but it's not quite there yet. They are still a bit soft on the inside and still very hot. While that finishes up, let's check out the next variation of this sweet treat. Grater cake follows pretty much the same process as shammy and uses similar ingredients. In terms of flavor though, it's a more delicate sweet treat compared to the bold spiciness of shammy. One major difference is that we peel off the darker outer layer of the dried coconut, leaving only the clean white meat. Grater cake also benefits from using a softer, greener coconut. While I'm working with dried coconut today, a greener coconut really enhances the delicate nature of this treat, yielding a softer, more tender product. For this grater cake, I'm using 5 cups of shredded coconut to 3 cups of granulated sugar. This keeps the same ratio as the shammy, 5 parts coconut to 3 parts sugar. To start, I'm adding 3 cups of sugar to the pot, along with 1 cup of water, 3 tablespoons of grated ginger, and a pinch of salt to bring out all those flavors. Some people prefer using whole ginger to maintain a lighter color, but grated ginger doesn't affect the color that much and it gives a lot more flavor. Now I'll just let the syrup thicken by reducing some of the water, just like we did with the shammy. One difference here is that we won't be adding any warm spices. This helps keep both the flavor and the color of the grater cake light and delicate. As soon as I see those large slow bubbles forming in the syrup, it's time to add the shredded coconut. We'll start out with high heat, but as the water reduces, we'll lower the heat. This step is especially important for grater cake. High heat can darken the color even if it doesn't burn. Once most of the water has reduced, I'm adding a teaspoon each of almond extract and rosewater. Growing up, I quickly gave up on buying grater cake at school. It was always a hit or miss. A lot of people would overdo the almond extract or rosewater and the overpowering flavors made it hard to enjoy. Grater cake is at its best when the flavors are perfectly balanced. You want the almond and rosewater to be subtle, not overwhelming. Just like with the shammy, you'll know that the grater cake is ready when it starts to set on the sides of the pot. Here I have a banana leaf baking dish and I'm going to show you how to get that pink on top. That's actually one of the names for grater cake. To the container, add about 2/3 of the grater cake mixture and flatten it out. This is actually setting up extremely fast. That glass container is absorbing a lot of that heat. We needed to add food coloring to the final third, but it's really hard now. No worries though, simply place it back on the fire and add a splash of water. That will loosen up the grater cake. Now we can add a few drops of red food coloring. If you're like me and not a big fan of artificial food dyes, beetroot powder works as a great natural alternative. Coloring is also optional and you can skip it altogether. Now we can spread the pink mixture over the white base. Work quickly to get it nice and even before it sets. You can see this setting up solid already. I'm going to let it cool completely. This setup also works for shammy, and you can even make grater cakes using spoons instead of a dish. Both setting techniques are interchangeable, so feel free to choose the one that works best for you. Once cool, we can cut the grater cake into squares or rectangles. Yes man, that set up real nice. These are a bit bigger than the typical size for grater cake, but since these are super sweet and I like to enjoy my sweets in moderation, I prefer to cut them smaller. No, that is a more appropriate serving. Grater cakes aren't just loved in Jamaica. You can find variations of them all across the Caribbean. Depending on where you're from, you might know them as sugar cakes, coconut cakes, or even coconut tablet. The ingredients can vary a lot too. Bay leaf, for example, is super popular in some countries. For special occasions, we even mix things up with different colors, like this yellow grater cake. And in this yellow grater cake, I've added a little peppermint essence. Peppermint is more common in candy making, but some countries drop a bit of it into their coconut cakes too. It gives a sweet and refreshing kick, taking the edge off the sugar. But how do these treats actually taste? Shammy is packed with warm spices, and that brown sugar gives it a lot of depth. Ginger adds a spicy heat, so shammy really has bold flavors. It's sweet but still really satisfying. Grater cake on the other hand is just as sweet, but it has a more delicate fragrant flavor. Even the ginger is light and complements the sweetness perfectly. And there you have it, we just made two of Jamaica's most popular grated coconut treats. Let me know down in the comment which one is your favorite or which one you will be making. I always love hearing from you. Big shout out to our patrons who keep the kitchen cooking. Your support means the world. This was a sweet one and it was a ton of fun to make. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to check out this next sweet treat. Catch you in the next one.